everybody, and welcome Chris to our taster session. We've been talking about loss, and we're in a pandemic at the moment, and we're doing our social distancing, and we're talking about loss. But what I wanted to talk about today, and as an interview style, really, is a subject of how do we actually survive catastrophic loss?
That's a good question.
Because everything seems very extreme at the minute, don't you think?
Yeah, it does.
And when we're looking at loss and the impact of surviving loss, the impact of loss of career, of job, of lives, actually, and especially for those that haven't been able to say goodbye to loved ones properly because of the pandemic. But I know that you're a survivor of loss by suicide.
That's right.
So I just wanted to ask you a few questions really around it, and we're going to do some workshop sessions on the impact and response to suicide next. But just for some sort of tips really, some how-tos of surviving that type of loss. And I'm just curious, how have you done that?
As you know, for those that don't know, we lost our son just over 5 years ago to suicide, and he took his own life while we were away in Australia in our home. It was an extremely traumatic experience, as you well know, Alison, because you walked through it with us. And there were times, if I'm really honest, when I believed we wouldn't survive it. Not personally, individually, nor as a family, but God's made it so that we can. And that's the miracle of surviving catastrophic loss. For me, I absolutely take my hat off, and I have such amazing respect for people who manage this journey without Jesus. Because quite honestly, without him, I would have never have managed it.
So one of your how-tos is your relationship with God.
Absolutely, my foundational relationship with God. And if you join us for the seminars as we move forward, you'll find us talking about something that probably looks a bit like this stool. And for me, I've been asked many times, how did you do it, Chris? And the answer to that, I think I'm settling on, is that the foundation of my life is a bit like this stool. This stool's really sturdy, and you can sit on it and it will hold your weight. I'm told David has sat on it and it does hold his weight. But it has 3 legs, and if any of those 3 legs are missing, you fall over. And it doesn't work as a stool anymore, and you end up on the floor.
So
it's like that.
Those 3 legs, what would you say those 3 legs represent?
Well, you'll have to do more of the course to understand it a bit more, but I would say the first leg, the most important leg probably, is the character. It's about knowing who you are. It's about identity. First of all, it's about knowing who God is, and then in relation to that, who you are and what that means to you.
Okay. So the character of God and the character of who we are in our humanity.
Yeah. The second leg, I would say, is something that we all think is a really good idea until we have to do it, and that's forgiveness. I know there have been many, many days where I've wondered if I could ever forgive people involved in the story. And sometimes people have actually said to me, have you forgiven God for letting it happen? Now, I was blessed, my character was so solidly in him, I never had a question of it was his fault. I did have a question of why. Lots
so you
of
didn't
times.
blame God?
I didn't blame God because I knew the character of God.
Okay.
And the character of God is that he's good all the time. And my circumstances do not change his character in any way, shape or form. I'm not that important.
So they would be really good things to explore later as well in the workshop.
Yeah, absolutely. And the third leg of my stool illustration, so you've got the character of God, your character, and how that affects your identity and who you are in Christ Jesus. You've got forgiveness of yourself and of others, And you've got, in the midst of all of that, this thing that I refer to as lordship. Is Jesus actually Lord of your life? Because if he isn't, then the character of God won't impact you in the same way. And you won't do what he's asking you to do, which is forgiveness. And so it is all connected together as one foundation that I can sit on, stand on, put my feet on, know it's not going to move. From that position is how I've survived these last 5 years.
Thank you for sharing some of the how-tos, which we can explore in more depth, actually, of how we appropriate what that actually means.
Absolutely.
But I'm very curious. You brought with you 3 props.
4 actually.
4 props of jugs and a ball. And talking about loss, when loss is so overwhelming and we actually don't know where to go, what to do, or how we're going to even survive the next second, I'm curious, how have you done that?
Quite early on our journey, we went to a Care for the Family bereavement seminar, and they used the illustration I'm about to talk you through now. So it actually is their illustration, I think. But at that time, this represents your grief, and if you're not in the room, you won't appreciate that this is a really heavy ball. Really heavy, much more heavy than you'd ever imagine. And that's how it feels when you first find that you've gone through a catastrophic loss. For us, our life appeared to be just the same. Going out, drinking wine, enjoying, going out, meeting with people, serving in the church, doing all the things that we did, running our business. Life was very much the same, and then this really heavy, all-encompassing thing came into our world. Loss. For us, it was the loss of a son. It could be the loss of a job, or the loss of your home, or whatever, really. But actually for us, it was the loss of Peter. In this conference, they talked about how your loss will never change, and I've always, for as long as I can remember, believed God's a healer, and so it was like, God's going to heal my broken heart, so of course it's going to change. And I got a bit uptight about it, I think, because I was uptight about most things then, because the loss was all consuming. And as I journeyed, I began to understand this illustration. So the idea is that the glass vessels represent your life as it is. So in time, and for some people it's a long time, some people that go through these things shorter, in time your world changes to take your loss into it. And so there's a bit of space in this jug, and that extra space is your capacity, what you can do and what you can not do. But the loss hasn't changed. The loss and the grief is still there. And then as you go a bit further down the road, if I can even get this ball out of here, your world expands. So your loss stays the same, but your capacity to live life expands. And you'll see we've used measuring jugs for these too, because I do think you do measure how you're doing, whether you are actually capable of doing more than you think you are. I didn't think I would ever survive Peter's loss. There were times when I didn't think I could, but now there's room in my life for other things besides Peter's loss as well.
So I was thinking about your illustration then about how we have capacity and how we manage, and often when we're working with individuals, loss isn't a linear process. Grieving isn't a linear process. It can be a bit like a tsunami, that some days you get hit by
another
wave of it, and sometimes it isn't. So I know that we've used measuring jugs that are different capacity sizes, but does that fluctuate for you?
Sometimes you feel that you've gone back to here. I was doing something the other day, and we're 5 years and a few weeks on, and I was doing something, I was typing something in, and I had the choice to type Peter's name or not type Peter's name. And I ended up in floods of tears. And I just wanted the whole world to go away, while I actually grieved my little boy. He was 32 and he was much bigger than me, but he's still my little boy. And so on a daily and sometimes a moment by moment basis, you can fluctuate from all these places without any notice sometimes, which makes it really hard for people around you. and hard for you to manage.
So when we go back to talking about healing, because that you said something about I wanted God to heal my pain, I wanted Him to heal my wound, but something as catastrophic as the loss of a child.
I can remember on the aircraft coming home saying to God, okay God, so how do I recover from this? I was running a 12-step recovery program at the time, and I knew I was going to be asked the question as soon as I walked in almost. It was like the first thing I thought everybody would ask me. And his instant answer, and it was an instant answer, was to say to me, you won't, Chris. And I went, what? But you're a God that heals. He said, yeah, I'll heal you. You will heal, but you won't recover. You will rehabilitate.
So you will learn to do living differently.
Absolutely. You will learn to do living differently.
So
there's more to that illustration that I'll give in the bigger course, but actually you can walk with Jesus through catastrophic loss. It will change you, but you will come out the other side still with Jesus if you do it His way.
So to sum up and to end from our taster session, there are 3 things that we're going to leave everybody with, and that is, was it good for you to give yourself permission to talk to God and talk to yourself and talk to others?
Absolutely.
Was that important?
Vitally important. Emotion needs to be expressed. It's no good it just sitting inside you, it eats you away. And if you can't talk to God and others about it, then where do you go with it?
So talking to God and talking to others.
Absolutely.
What happened when you didn't know quite what to say?
I didn't say anything, and God was there anyway. And I think there are some situations, and again we'll talk more about this, some situations where people expect you to say, or expect you to have the words, and you don't know what to say. I remember being at the back of church a few Sundays into, in fact it was Easter Sunday, after Peter had died, and a lady that I was in a fellowship with came up to me and threw herself in my arms and was heartbroken, saying, Chris, I can't believe that this has happened to you. I couldn't say a word to her. Not a word. I just held her and she went off because I didn't say anything. But I didn't know what to say. I had no words to say.
So it's okay to give yourself permission to not have to say anything?
Absolutely, yeah.
And for those people who didn't know what to say to you, what would you say to people who, because often in catastrophic loss people don't know what to say, do they?
No, they don't. And actually it's better to not say anything and be present.
And say I don't know what to say.
Yes, say
Just
you don't know,
acknowledge
or not
what is.
even say, just be there. But it's the presence, it's being with somebody
And
that
acknowledging
matters.
it.
And being there, even if you cry, or you just say, we've talked about this before, or you don't say anything at all. If you're there with them, then that's about relationship. And that helps the other person to be able to feel they're safe. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen because people don't know what to say, and so they stay away. And there's a whole host of things about that we could talk about.
But we'll talk about that in the workshop as well. So you've had lots of tasters and 3 key points to think about, really. And hope that you join us for our next session on when we sort of talk about it in more depth.
Amen. Yeah.
Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you for listening.